close your eyes for a moment and think about the last time you drove home from work. Can you remember every turn, every stoplight, every moment of that journey? Probably not. And yet, you arrived safely, navigating complex decisions without conscious thought. This is your first glimpse into a profound truth. Beneath the surface of your awareness lies a vast ocean of mental processes that shape nearly everything you do. Scientists estimate that your unconscious mind processes approximately 11 million pieces of information every single second, while your conscious mind handles only about 40. Imagine that, 11 million to 40. Your conscious awareness is like a tiny flashlight beam in an enormous dark warehouse, illuminating only the smallest fraction of what's actually there. Everything else, the vast majority of your mental life, operates in shadow, quietly running the show. This discovery fundamentally changed how we understand human behavior. For most of history, people believed they were rational creatures, making deliberate choices based on careful consideration. But in the late 1800s, researchers began to suspect something else was at work. They noticed that people could be influenced by things they never consciously perceived, that memories could shape behavior without ever reaching awareness, and that decisions often seemed to be made before people realized they'd made them. The unconscious doesn't just store forgotten memories, it actively constructs your reality moment by moment. Consider this remarkable fact: when you look at the world around you, there's actually a tiny blind spot in each eye where the optic nerve connects to your retina. You can't see anything in that spot. Yet you never notice a hole in your vision, do you? That's because your unconscious mind seamlessly fills in the gap, painting over the missing piece with information it predicts should be there based on surrounding context. You quite literally see things that aren't there, hallucinations created by your brain to give you a complete picture of reality. Your unconscious is an artist, constantly painting the world you think you're objectively perceiving. This creative reconstruction happens not just with vision, but with memory itself. When you recall a childhood birthday party or your first day of school, you're not retrieving a video file stored in your brain. Instead, your unconscious reassembles fragments, a smell, an emotion, a color, and weaves them into what feels like a coherent memory. Each time you remember something, you're actually changing it slightly, incorporating new information and current beliefs. Your past is not fixed, it's rewritten every time you visit it, shaped by who you are now rather than who you were then. Perhaps even more striking is how your unconscious mind makes decisions before you're aware of them. In a famous series of experiments in the 1980s, researchers asked people to decide when to press a button, whenever they felt the urge. Using brain scanners, scientists could detect activity in the motor cortex that predicted the button press up to 7 seconds before the person reported feeling the conscious urge to act. 7 seconds. Your brain had already committed to the action while your conscious mind still believed it was freely deliberating. The decision bubble rose from unconscious depths before breaking the surface of awareness. This doesn't mean you're simply a puppet of unconscious forces. The relationship is more subtle and beautiful than that. Think of your mind as an iceberg. The tip above water is your conscious awareness, limited, bright, articulate. But the massive structure below the surface, that's where the real power lies. That submerged architecture learned to walk when you were a toddler, processes the emotional subtext of conversations, recognizes your mother's face in a fraction of a second, and makes you suddenly nervous around someone without knowing why. Your unconscious is also a tireless guardian, constantly scanning your environment for threats and opportunities. It can detect danger in as little as 17 milliseconds, far faster than conscious thought. This is why you might feel suddenly uneasy in a situation before you can articulate what's wrong. Your unconscious has already noticed something amiss, a facial expression, a tone of voice, an inconsistency in someone's story. It's protecting you, raising alarm bells that manifest as gut feelings and intuitions. And here's something that might surprise you: your unconscious mind is listening even when you think you're not paying attention. In the 1950s, researchers discovered what they called the cocktail party effect. Imagine you're at a crowded party, focused on a conversation with a friend. The room is full of overlapping voices, but you're filtering out everything except your friend's words. Then, across the room, someone says your name. Instantly, your attention shifts. Your unconscious had been monitoring all those irrelevant conversations simultaneously, waiting for something personally significant. The moment it heard your name, it pushed that information into your conscious awareness. This is the world we're about to explore together, a world where most of your life unfolds in darkness, where the roots of your behavior burrow deep beneath the soil of awareness, where you are both more and less in control than you ever imagined. Let's travel deeper now, into the question of how this unconscious mind of yours first took shape. Because you weren't born with the vast subterranean library of knowledge you possess now. You had to build it, experience by experience, moment by moment. When you entered the world as an infant, your conscious mind was barely a flicker. You couldn't think in words, couldn't plan for the future, couldn't even understand that you were a separate being from your mother. And yet, your unconscious was already hard at work, absorbing everything. In the first 3 years of life, your brain forms approximately 1 million neural connections every single second. 1 million. Every second. Think about that extraordinary construction project. Your unconscious mind was building the very architecture that would house your personality, your habits, your deepest fears and desires. During these early years, something profound happens that shapes the rest of your life. You begin to learn through a process called implicit memory, memories that form without conscious awareness and can't be deliberately recalled, but which influence your behavior forever. A child who is consistently comforted when distressed develops an unconscious expectation that the world is safe and that others can be trusted. A child who is often left alone in their distress develops a different unconscious blueprint, one that whispers, even decades later, "You're on your own, don't rely on others." These aren't conscious beliefs you can easily examine or change. They're foundation stones, laid down before you had language to describe them. This is why you might find yourself, as an adult, inexplicably drawn to certain types of people or situations that mirror your earliest experiences. Your unconscious is following a template it created before you were 3 years old, before you could even remember. Psychologists call these working models of the world, unconscious assumptions about how relationships work, whether you're worthy of love, whether the world is fundamentally dangerous or safe. These models operate like invisible scripts, guiding your behavior in ways you might never consciously recognize. But here's something even more fascinating: your unconscious doesn't just learn from direct experience. It learns by watching others, absorbing their behaviors and emotions through a process so automatic you don't even notice it's happening. In the 1990s, neuroscientists discovered what they called mirror neurons, brain cells that fire both when you perform an action and when you watch someone else perform that same action. When you see someone smile, the same neurons activate in your brain as if you were smiling yourself. Your unconscious is constantly running simulations, trying on other people's experiences as if they were your own. This is why you might unconsciously cross your arms when talking to someone who has their arms crossed, or why you start speaking more softly when someone lowers their voice. Your unconscious mind is mirroring the people around you, creating connection and understanding beneath the threshold of awareness. It's also why spending time with anxious people can make you feel anxious, or why laughter truly is contagious. Your emotional states are far less individual than you think. They're constantly being shaped by the unconscious signals you're receiving from everyone around you. This unconscious absorption continues throughout your entire life, but nowhere is it more powerful than in childhood. Children are essentially sponges for unconscious information. They learn not primarily from what adults tell them, but from what adults do, from the emotional climate of their homes, from thousands of tiny interactions that never register in conscious memory. A parent's unconscious anxiety about money, never spoken aloud, can become a child's unconscious anxiety about security. A teacher's subtle bias, completely unintentional, can shape a student's unconscious beliefs about their own abilities. And here's where it gets particularly interesting. Your unconscious mind is always learning, always adapting, but it learns different things at different times of life. There are what developmental psychologists call sensitive periods, windows of time when your unconscious is especially receptive to certain kinds of information. The window for easily learning language, for instance, begins to close around puberty. This is why children can become fluent in multiple languages without conscious effort, while adults must struggle and study. The unconscious mind of a child is like soft clay, readily taking the impression of linguistic patterns. By adulthood, that clay is hardened. But it never completely hardens. Throughout your life, your unconscious continues to encode experiences, especially emotional ones. In fact, emotionally charged events create stronger unconscious memories than neutral events, which is why you can probably remember exactly where you were during a personal crisis or a moment of intense joy, but you can't remember what you had for lunch 3 Tuesdays ago. Your unconscious acts as an archivist with very particular interests. It prioritizes survival, emotion, and pattern recognition over trivial details. This emotional tagging system in your unconscious serves a crucial function. Imagine if your brain tried to consciously remember and process every single moment of your life with equal weight. You'd be paralyzed by information overload. Instead, your unconscious performs a kind of triage, deciding what's important enough to flag for conscious attention and what can be efficiently handled automatically. By some estimates, if you had to consciously process all the information your unconscious handles, you would need to be consciously aware for about 500 times longer than you actually live just to keep up. So your unconscious isn't just a filing cabinet of forgotten memories. It's a sophisticated system for navigating complexity, for learning patterns without conscious effort, for building models of reality that allow you to function in an impossibly complicated world. In every moment of your life, every conversation, every emotion, every fleeting impression, is being quietly encoded into this vast underground network, shaping the person you're becoming without you ever consciously noticing. Now that we've seen how your unconscious builds itself through experience, let's explore one of its most mysterious powers, the ability to solve problems while you sleep, while you daydream, while your conscious mind is looking elsewhere entirely. You've probably experienced this yourself. You struggle with a problem all day, a decision you can't make, a creative challenge that won't resolve, a name you can't quite remember. Then you give up, go to bed, and wake up the next morning with the answer sitting clearly in your mind. It feels like magic, but it's actually your unconscious doing what it does best, working on problems in the background while your conscious attention is occupied elsewhere. Scientists have discovered that this isn't just a pleasant coincidence. The unconscious mind excels at finding connections between seemingly unrelated pieces of information, connections that your more rigid, logical conscious mind might never notice. In one remarkable study, researchers gave people complex puzzles to solve. Some participants were asked to think consciously about the solutions, while others were distracted with unrelated tasks. Surprisingly, the distracted group, the ones whose unconscious minds were allowed to work without conscious interference, solved the problems more effectively and more creatively. This happens because your conscious mind tends to work linearly, following logical steps from A to B to C. But your unconscious mind makes intuitive leaps. It holds multiple possibilities simultaneously, tests associations that seem absurd, and occasionally stumbles upon insights that feel like sudden revelations. The famous chemist August Kekulé discovered the ring structure of benzene after dreaming of a snake biting its own tail. His unconscious mind had been churning through the chemical puzzle while he slept, expressing its solution in symbolic form. This is why so many creative breakthroughs happen in the shower, on walks, or in those drowsy moments just before sleep. Your unconscious needs your conscious mind to step aside. When you stop trying so hard, when you relax your focused attention, you create space for unconscious processing to surface. The solutions were being prepared all along, built from fragments of knowledge your conscious mind didn't realize were connected. But the unconscious doesn't just solve intellectual puzzles. It's also constantly making judgments about people and situations, forming impressions that bubble up as what we call intuition or gut feelings. And here's something remarkable: unconscious judgments are often more accurate than conscious deliberation when it comes to complex social situations. In studies where people were asked to predict the success of romantic relationships or job candidates, those who made snap judgments based on brief observations often outperformed those who carefully analyzed detailed information. Why? Because the unconscious mind is a master pattern recognizer. It can detect subtle inconsistencies in body language, notice micro-expressions that last a fraction of a second, and sense emotional undertones that the conscious mind is too slow or too distracted to catch. Your unconscious reads thousands of tiny signals: a shift in posture, a hesitation before speaking, a tension around someone's eyes, and integrates them into a felt sense of something's off or this feels right. This doesn't mean your intuition is always correct, of course. Your unconscious can also be biased, drawing on stereotypes and past experiences that may not apply to the current situation. But it does mean that dismissing your gut feelings as irrational can be a mistake. That unease you feel around someone who seems perfectly nice on the surface? Your unconscious may have detected something your conscious mind hasn't yet pieced together. The unconscious is also remarkably skilled at something called statistical learning, detecting patterns in the environment without any conscious awareness of doing so. Even infants, just 8 months old, can unconsciously track statistical regularities in the speech they hear, learning which sounds tend to follow other sounds, which helps them eventually segment the flowing river of speech into distinct words. They're not consciously counting or analyzing, their unconscious minds are simply absorbing patterns. This statistical learning continues throughout life. You unconsciously learn the unwritten rules of social interaction in different contexts: how long to hold eye contact, how close to stand, when to laugh, when to be serious. Nobody teaches you these things explicitly, your unconscious extracts them from thousands of observations. This is why moving to a new culture can feel so disorienting. Your unconscious hasn't yet learned the new statistical patterns, so interactions that should flow automatically require exhausting conscious effort. And here's something that might surprise you: your unconscious mind continues this learning and problem-solving work even while you sleep. During REM sleep, when you dream, your brain is actively consolidating memories, integrating new information with old, and sometimes arriving at novel solutions. Researchers have found that people who sleep after learning something new show better retention and deeper understanding than those who stay awake, even when the time elapsed is identical. Sleep isn't just rest, it's when your unconscious sorts through the day's experiences, deciding what to keep, what to discard, and how to weave new knowledge into existing frameworks. But the unconscious doesn't wait for sleep to do this work. Throughout the day, your mind naturally cycles between focused attention and what neuroscientists call the default mode network, a state of diffuse awareness where your unconscious makes connections and consolidates learning. This is that feeling of your mind wandering, of thoughts drifting seemingly at random. Your conscious mind might see this as wasted time, but your unconscious is actually integrating information, solving problems, and preparing insights that will later seem to arrive out of nowhere. This is why constant stimulation, always having your phone in hand, always consuming content, never allowing boredom or mental drift, can actually impair your creativity and problem-solving abilities. Your unconscious needs unstructured time to do its deepest work. The breakthrough ideas, the sudden clarity, the solutions that seem to appear from nowhere, these are gifts from your unconscious mind, but only if you give it the space to work its magic. We've explored how your unconscious learns and solves problems, but now let's turn to something even more intimate, the way your unconscious shapes your very sense of who you are. You probably think of your identity as something conscious and deliberate, a story you tell yourself about who you are, what you value, what makes you uniquely you. But beneath this conscious narrative, your unconscious holds a much older, deeper sense of self, one that was formed long before you had words to describe it. Psychologists have discovered that by 18 months of age, children already possess what's called an implicit self, an unconscious awareness of being a distinct entity separate from others. You can see this when a toddler recognizes themselves in a mirror or shows embarrassment when caught doing something they shouldn't. This unconscious sense of self develops through countless interactions, the way caregivers respond to your needs, the emotional tone of their voices, the consistency or chaos of your early environment. All of this gets encoded unconsciously, forming the bedrock of your identity. But here's what's particularly fascinating. Your unconscious self-concept can be dramatically different from the person you consciously believe yourself to be. You might consciously think of yourself as confident and capable, while your unconscious harbors deep-seated doubts planted decades ago. Or you might consciously believe you're unworthy of success, while your unconscious, shaped by moments of genuine accomplishment and love, holds a stronger, more resilient sense of your worth. These conflicts between conscious and unconscious self-perceptions create what psychologists call cognitive dissonance, and they drive much of human behavior. When your actions contradict your conscious self-image, your unconscious works overtime to resolve the tension, often by rewriting the story you tell yourself. If you think of yourself as honest but tell a significant lie, your unconscious might minimize the lie's importance, rationalize it as necessary, or selectively remember events differently to preserve your self-image. Your unconscious is a masterful storyteller, constantly editing the narrative to maintain psychological coherence. This editing happens not just with your past, but with your present moment-to-moment experience. Right now, as you listen to these words, you're not aware of the feeling of your clothes against your skin, the subtle sounds in your environment, the slight hunger or thirst you might be feeling. Your unconscious filters out approximately 99% of the sensory information available to you, allowing only the most relevant fragments to reach conscious awareness. Without this filtering, you would be overwhelmed, drowning in a chaos of sensations. But this filtering isn't neutral, it's guided by your unconscious beliefs, fears, and desires. If you unconsciously believe the world is dangerous, your attention will be drawn to potential threats that others might not even notice. If you unconsciously crave approval, you'll be exquisitely attuned to others' facial expressions and tone of voice, constantly scanning for signs of acceptance or rejection. Your unconscious quite literally shapes what you perceive, creating a reality that confirms its own deepest assumptions. This is called confirmation bias, and it's one of the unconscious mind's most powerful tools for maintaining stability. Once your unconscious forms a belief, about yourself, about others, about how the world works, it begins selecting evidence that supports that belief while filtering out contradictory information. Studies show that people recall information that confirms their existing beliefs about 4 times better than information that contradicts them. Your unconscious isn't trying to deceive you, it's trying to create a stable, predictable model of reality. Change and contradiction feel threatening to this model, so they're often quietly dismissed or reinterpreted. This is why changing deeply held beliefs is so difficult. It's not that you're stubborn or irrational, it's that your unconscious has woven certain beliefs into the very fabric of your identity and your perception of reality. To change them requires not just conscious decision-making, but somehow reaching down into those unconscious layers where the beliefs took root, often before you had language to name them. Yet change is possible, and it often happens through the unconscious rather than despite it. When you have a powerful emotional experience that contradicts an unconscious belief, your unconscious begins to update its model of reality. This is why therapy can be effective even when patients don't consciously understand what's changing. The therapeutic relationship itself, being consistently heard, accepted, and valued, can gradually reshape unconscious beliefs about worthiness and connection that formed in early childhood. The unconscious is also responsible for what psychologists call priming effects, the way subtle cues in your environment unconsciously influence your behavior in ways you'd never consciously choose. In one famous study, researchers had participants unscramble sentences containing words related to old age, like wrinkle, gray, and retired. Afterward, without realizing it, participants walked more slowly down the hallway. Their unconscious minds had been primed with the concept of old age, and it literally changed how they moved through space. These priming effects are everywhere in your life. The music playing in a store influences how much you spend. The weather affects your mood and your generosity. A whiff of cleaning product makes you unconsciously more judgmental about moral issues. Your unconscious is constantly being shaped by environmental cues you never consciously register, and in turn, these cues shape your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors in subtle but meaningful ways. This might sound unsettling, the idea that you're so susceptible to unconscious influences. But consider this, your unconscious adaptability is actually what allows you to function in a complex, ever-changing world. If you had to consciously process every environmental cue, every social signal, every potential threat or opportunity, you'd be paralyzed. Your unconscious handles the vast majority of these assessments automatically, freeing your conscious mind to focus on what truly requires deliberate attention. And here's something beautiful, while your unconscious is being shaped by your environment, it's also actively shaping that environment in return. The warmth or coldness you unconsciously project influences how others respond to you, which in turn confirms your unconscious beliefs about relationships. You co-create your reality through this constant feedback loop between unconscious expectations and the responses they generate from the world around you. You're not simply a passive recipient of unconscious influences, you're an active participant in an intricate dance between inner and outer worlds. As we journey deeper into the unconscious realm, we arrive at perhaps its most powerful domain, the world of emotion. Because while you may think you consciously choose how to feel, the truth is far more mysterious. Consider the last time you felt suddenly anxious without knowing why, or when a wave of sadness washed over you seemingly out of nowhere. These feelings didn't emerge from conscious thought, they arose from your unconscious, which had detected something significant long before your rational mind could catch up. Your unconscious processes emotional information approximately 20,000 times faster than your conscious mind. 20,000 times. This means that by the time you consciously recognize that you're afraid, your unconscious has already triggered a cascade of physiological changes. Your heart rate has increased, stress hormones have flooded your bloodstream, and your body is prepared for fight or flight. The emotion arrives first, the conscious understanding of why you feel it comes later if at all. This is why you might walk into a room and immediately feel uncomfortable without knowing why, or meet someone and instantly sense they can't be trusted. Your unconscious has perceived countless microsignals, a tone of voice, a barely perceptible facial expression, something in the energy of the space, and generated an emotional response before your conscious mind has even begun to analyze the situation. These emotional reactions are ancient evolutionary tools, designed to keep you alive in a world where thinking too long about danger meant becoming someone's dinner. But the unconscious doesn't just generate emotions in response to immediate threats. It's constantly running simulations, imagining possible futures and generating feelings about them. When you're trying to make a decision and something feels wrong about one option, that's your unconscious integrating vast amounts of information, past experiences, subtle patterns, potential consequences, and delivering its assessment as a felt sense in your body. Neuroscientist Antonio Damasio discovered that people with damage to the brain regions connecting emotion and reasoning actually make worse decisions, even though their logical abilities remain intact. Without unconscious emotional guidance, they become paralyzed by endless analysis. This challenges the old notion that emotions are obstacles to clear thinking. In reality, emotions are a form of unconscious intelligence, a rapid processing system that helps you navigate complexity far faster than conscious deliberation ever could. Your anxiety isn't necessarily irrational, it might be your unconscious detecting genuine danger that your conscious mind hasn't yet articulated. Your joy isn't random, it's your unconscious recognizing that something aligns with your deepest needs and values. Yet here's the complication. Your unconscious emotional responses were calibrated by your past experiences, particularly those early years we discussed earlier. If you grew up in an environment where love was conditional or unpredictable, your unconscious might generate anxiety in intimate relationships even when your partner is trustworthy. The unconscious is responding to old patterns, protecting you from threats that no longer exist. It's trying to help, but it's working from an outdated map. This is why you can consciously know something: my partner loves me, I'm safe, I'm capable, while unconsciously feeling the opposite. These unconscious feelings were encoded in a different context, often before you had language, and they operate according to their own logic. Psychologists call this emotional memory, memories stored not as narratives you can recall, but as bodily sensations and automatic responses that arise when certain triggers appear. Your unconscious doesn't just store individual emotional memories, it creates emotional schemas, templates for how certain situations should feel. If you were frequently criticized as a child, your unconscious might have formed a schema that links being noticed with being judged. Now, as an adult, whenever you're the center of attention, you automatically feel anxious, even in contexts where no judgment is present. The unconscious generalizes from specific experiences to broader patterns, which is efficient for survival but can lead to emotional responses that don't match your current reality. Interestingly, your unconscious emotional responses can be changed, but rarely through conscious reasoning alone. Telling yourself there's nothing to be afraid of doesn't update the unconscious fear response, because the unconscious doesn't primarily speak in words, it speaks in experiences, in felt sensations, in repeated patterns. To update an unconscious emotional response, you typically need new experiences that contradict the old pattern, repeated enough times that the unconscious begins to revise its template. This is why exposure therapy works for phobias. By repeatedly experiencing the feared situation without the expected catastrophe occurring, the unconscious gradually learns a new pattern. It's not that you consciously decide to stop being afraid, rather, your unconscious updates its prediction model based on accumulating evidence that contradicts its original programming. The unconscious also plays a fascinating role in emotional contagion, the way feelings spread between people without conscious awareness. When you're in a room with someone who's anxious, you often become anxious yourself, even if they never mention their anxiety and you don't consciously notice any signs of it. Research shows that we unconsciously synchronize our heart rates, breathing patterns, and even our brain waves with people we're interacting with. Your unconscious is constantly attuning to the emotional states of others, creating connection but also making you vulnerable to absorbing feelings that aren't originally yours. This unconscious emotional attunement begins in infancy. Babies engage in what's called affect synchrony with their caregivers. When the parent smiles, the baby smiles. When the parent looks worried, the baby becomes distressed. Through thousands of these micro-interactions, the infant's unconscious learns how to regulate emotion by co-regulating with another person. This is why your ability to manage your own emotions as an adult is intimately connected to how your emotions were responded to in childhood. If your distress was met with calm, soothing presence, your unconscious learned that emotions are manageable. If your distress was met with more distress or with dismissal, your unconscious learned something very different. And here's something profound: the unconscious doesn't distinguish between vividly imagined experiences and real ones when it comes to emotional learning. This is why visualization techniques can be powerful. If you repeatedly imagine yourself succeeding in a situation that typically triggers anxiety, your unconscious begins to encode a new pattern. It's also why rumination, repeatedly imagining worst-case scenarios, can actually strengthen unconscious anxiety. You're essentially practicing fear, giving your unconscious more evidence that there's something to be afraid of. Your unconscious emotional world is both your most ancient inheritance and your most intimate companion. It carries the wisdom of millions of years of evolution and the specific wisdom of your own unique journey through life. Learning to listen to it, to understand its language, to gently update its outdated maps, this is perhaps the most important work of becoming fully human. We've seen how the unconscious shapes your emotions, but now let's explore something even more fundamental: the way your unconscious constructs your sense of reality itself, moment by moment, without you ever suspecting its creative hand. Right now, you believe you're experiencing the world directly, that you see what's really there, hear what's actually happening, perceive reality as it is. But this is one of the unconscious mind's most beautiful illusions. What you experience as the present moment is actually your brain's best guess about reality, a prediction based on past experience, arriving in your awareness approximately half a second after the events it describes. Think about that for a moment. Half a second. In the time it takes for sensory information to travel from your eyes and ears to your conscious awareness, your unconscious has already interpreted it, filled in missing pieces, and constructed a coherent experience. You're always living slightly in the past, experiencing not reality itself but your unconscious mind's carefully crafted reconstruction of it. This delay exists because conscious processing is slow, remarkably slow compared to the speed at which the world unfolds. So your unconscious developed a solution. Rather than waiting to consciously process everything, it predicts what's about to happen based on patterns learned from the past, then adjusts those predictions only when something unexpected occurs. You're not perceiving reality, you're perceiving your unconscious mind's predictions about reality, updated in real time when those predictions prove wrong. This is why magic tricks work so effectively. The magician exploits your unconscious predictions. You expect the coin to be in the hand that closed around it, so your unconscious constructs an experience of the coin being there, even as the magician's other hand secretly palms it. Your unconscious is so committed to its predictions that you quite literally see things that aren't there and miss things that are. The present moment you're experiencing is actually a simulation, a virtual reality generated by your unconscious mind. But this predictive system does more than just smooth over processing delays. It fundamentally shapes what you're capable of perceiving. Studies have shown that if you're shown an image too briefly for conscious recognition, just a few milliseconds, your unconscious still processes it and influences your subsequent behavior. In one remarkable experiment, researchers flashed images of faces showing fear or happiness so quickly that participants had no conscious awareness of seeing them. Yet when asked to judge the trustworthiness of neutral faces shown immediately afterward, participants rated them as more or less trustworthy based on the emotion in the subliminal image they never consciously saw. Your unconscious is constantly processing information that never reaches your awareness, using it to color your perceptions, guide your choices, and shape your feelings. You're making decisions based on information you don't know you have, responding to cues you never consciously detected. The you that you're aware of is like an actor on stage, delivering lines and making gestures, while an entire crew works behind the curtain, adjusting the lighting, changing the scenery, cueing the sound effects, all invisible to the audience and often to the actor as well. This unconscious processing extends to something even more intimate: your perception of time itself. You've probably noticed that time seems to pass differently depending on your state of mind, flying by when you're engaged and enjoying yourself, crawling when you're bored or in pain. This isn't just a metaphor. Your unconscious actually constructs your subjective experience of duration, and this construction can be dramatically influenced by factors you never consciously consider. In one fascinating study, researchers found that people judge a sound as lasting longer when it's accompanied by a visual stimulus that expands, compared to an identical sound paired with a contracting visual. The actual duration is the same, but your unconscious uses context, in this case, the visual suggestion of expansion, to construct your experience of how long something lasts. Even your sense of time is a creative interpretation, not a direct perception. Your unconscious also shapes your experience through what psychologists call attentional spotlight. It decides, without consulting your conscious awareness, what deserves your attention and what should be filtered out. In any given moment, you could potentially pay attention to thousands of different things, but your unconscious selects just a handful, creating the impression that these selected items are simply what's there. Everything else exists in a kind of perceptual fog, present but unacknowledged. This selection process is deeply influenced by your unconscious goals, fears, and values. If you're hungry, your attention is unconsciously drawn to food-related cues. If you're anxious about your health, you notice bodily sensations that others would ignore. If you've recently learned a new word, you suddenly start hearing it everywhere, not because it's appearing more frequently, but because your unconscious has flagged it as relevant and now includes it in your conscious awareness when previously it filtered it out. This phenomenon, called the Bader-Meinhof effect or frequency illusion, reveals how actively your unconscious curates your experience. But perhaps most remarkably, your unconscious doesn't just select and interpret, it actually fills in gaps in your perception so seamlessly that you never noticed the gaps existed. Remember that blind spot we discussed earlier? That's just one example. Your eyes make rapid movements called saccades several times per second, and during these movements, you're essentially blind. Yet you never experience these moments of blindness because your unconscious stitches together a continuous experience, painting over the gaps. The same thing happens with memory. When you recall a conversation, you remember the gist, the emotional tone, perhaps a few specific phrases. But in the moment of remembering, your unconscious fills in the details, constructing exact wording that seems like genuine memory but is actually creative reconstruction. Most of what you experience as remembering is actually imagining, though your unconscious presents it with such confidence that you never question its authenticity. This might sound unsettling, this idea that so much of your experience is constructed rather than directly perceived. But consider the alternative. If you consciously processed every photon hitting your retina, every sound wave reaching your ear, every sensation on your skin, every potential object of attention, you would be completely overwhelmed. Your unconscious creates a simplified, coherent, functional reality that allows you to navigate the world effectively. It's not deceiving you, it's protecting you from the chaos of raw existence. And there's something profound in recognizing this. Once you understand that your experience is constructed by your unconscious, you begin to see that suffering often comes not from reality itself but from the way your unconscious interprets and presents that reality to you. The anxious person and the calm person aren't necessarily living in different worlds, they're living in the same world filtered through different unconscious lenses. Changing your experience doesn't always require changing external circumstances, sometimes it requires gently updating the filters through which your unconscious constructs your reality. As we continue our journey through the hidden landscapes of mind, we arrive at one of the unconscious's most intriguing territories, the realm of habit and automatic behavior. Think about this morning. You probably got out of bed, went through your morning routine, brushing your teeth, making coffee, getting dressed, without consciously deciding each action. You didn't stand in front of the toothbrush thinking, now I shall grasp the handle, apply pressure with my thumb and forefinger, raise it to my mouth. You simply did it, your body moving through a choreography so familiar it required no conscious attention at all. Researchers estimate that approximately 40 to 45% of everything you do each day is habitual, actions performed automatically by your unconscious while your conscious mind wanders elsewhere. Nearly half of your life is lived on autopilot. This is both extraordinary and, when you think about it, absolutely necessary. Imagine if you had to consciously direct every action, every movement. You'd never get through breakfast. But here's what makes habits so fascinating. They're not simply learned behaviors. Once a habit is fully encoded in your unconscious, it becomes essentially a separate program that runs independently of your conscious intentions. This is why you can find yourself reaching for your phone even when you consciously decided to take a break from it, or why you drive the familiar route to work even on a Saturday when you meant to go somewhere else entirely. Your unconscious has learned a pattern so thoroughly that it can execute it without consulting your conscious wishes. Neuroscientists have discovered that habits actually change the physical structure of your brain. When you first learn a new behavior, it requires significant conscious attention and activates many different brain regions. But as the behavior becomes habitual through repetition, the neural activity shifts to deeper, more primitive parts of the brain, particularly an area called the basal ganglia, which operates largely outside of conscious awareness. The behavior gets encoded as a chunk, a single unit that can be triggered and executed as one seamless action. This chunking process is one of the unconscious mind's most powerful learning mechanisms. By converting conscious processes into unconscious routines, your brain frees up mental resources for new learning and complex problem solving. When you first learned to drive, it consumed all of your attention, monitoring speed, checking mirrors, coordinating the pedals, watching for other cars. Now you can drive while having a conversation, planning your day, or listening to music. The driving itself has been chunked into unconscious routines, allowing your conscious mind to do other things. But this efficiency comes with a cost. Once behaviors become deeply habitual, they become remarkably resistant to change. Studies show that even when people consciously know a habit is harmful and genuinely want to change it, the unconscious pattern can persist for months or years. This isn't weakness or lack of willpower, it's the unconscious doing exactly what it was designed to do, maintain stable patterns that have worked in the past. The unconscious creates habits through a three-part loop: cue, routine, and reward. The cue triggers the unconscious to initiate the behavior, the routine is the behavior itself, and the reward reinforces the pattern for future use. What makes this particularly powerful is that the unconscious can learn this loop after just a few repetitions, especially if the reward is emotionally significant. This is why you can develop a habit of checking your phone when you feel bored in just a few days, but breaking that habit might take months. And here's something that reveals the unconscious's true power: the cue that triggers a habit can be so subtle that you never consciously recognize it. You might think you're randomly reaching for a snack, but your unconscious has detected a cue, a certain time of day, a particular emotional state, a specific location, and initiated the habitual response. The feeling is "I want a snack," but that wanting itself was generated by your unconscious in response to a pattern it learned to associate with eating. This is why understanding your triggers is so crucial for changing habits. The conscious decision "I will stop eating junk food" is rarely enough, because it doesn't address the unconscious cues that initiate the behavior. To change a habit, you typically need to either avoid the cue, replace the routine with a different behavior that provides a similar reward, or repeatedly experience the cue without the reward until the unconscious pattern weakens. But habits aren't just about individual behaviors, they extend to patterns of thinking and feeling as well. Your unconscious develops habitual ways of interpreting events, habitual emotional reactions, even habitual thoughts that arise automatically in certain situations. If you habitually interpret ambiguous social interactions as rejection, or habitually worry about worst-case scenarios, these aren't really conscious choices, they're mental habits your unconscious has encoded and now executes automatically. The good news is that just as unhelpful habits can form unconsciously, helpful ones can too. When you repeatedly practice a new behavior or thought pattern, your unconscious gradually encodes it, and what initially required enormous effort eventually becomes automatic. This is why meditation teachers emphasize consistent daily practice. You're not just learning to be mindful, you're training your unconscious to automatically notice when your attention has wandered and gently bring it back. Eventually, this noticing becomes so automatic you don't even realize you're doing it. The unconscious also governs something called procedural memory, your memory for how to do things. This is distinct from declarative memory, which is your conscious memory for facts and events. Once you've learned to ride a bicycle, that knowledge is stored in procedural memory, and you can execute it even decades later without conscious thought. You might not be able to consciously explain exactly how you balance or when you shift your weight, but your unconscious remembers perfectly. This kind of learning is incredibly durable, far more so than conscious learning. You can forget facts you consciously studied, but skills encoded in your unconscious procedural memory remain accessible for a lifetime. This is why the phrase "it's like riding a bicycle" has become a metaphor for unforgettable knowledge. Your unconscious, once it truly learns something through repeated practice, holds on to it with remarkable tenacity. Understanding this reveals something important: lasting change in your life usually requires working with your unconscious rather than against it. Willpower, conscious effort to override unconscious patterns, is a limited resource that depletes quickly. But when you align your unconscious habits with your conscious goals, when you train your unconscious through repetition and consistency, change becomes almost effortless. The energy isn't in forcing yourself to do the right thing, it's in setting up conditions that allow your unconscious to learn new patterns that serve you better. We've explored how your unconscious creates habits, but now let's venture into perhaps its most mysterious territory, the hidden landscape of motivation and desire, the forces that move you through life, often without your conscious understanding of why. You wake up one morning and feel compelled to rearrange your entire living room. You meet someone new and feel inexplicably drawn to them, or inexplicably repelled. You pursue a career for years before realizing it never truly aligned with what you wanted. These aren't random occurrences. Your unconscious harbors desires, aversions, and motivations that powerfully shape your behavior, yet they often remain hidden from your conscious awareness, working like underground rivers that determine the direction of your life. Psychologists have discovered that much of what we call motivation operates at an unconscious level. When researchers ask people why they made certain choices, the explanations people give often don't match the actual factors that influence their decisions. In one famous study, shoppers were asked to choose between identical stockings displayed in a row. Most people chose the ones on the right side, but when asked why, they gave reasons about quality and texture, never mentioning position. Their unconscious had a preference for items on the right, but their conscious mind constructed a rational explanation after the fact. This happens constantly in your life. You tell yourself you took a particular job for the salary or the career advancement, but your unconscious might have been drawn to something entirely different, perhaps the approval of a parent, or safety, or the avoidance of a deeper fear. Your conscious mind is remarkably skilled at generating plausible explanations for choices that were actually made by unconscious processes you don't have direct access to. You're not lying to yourself, you genuinely believe these explanations. But they're often post hoc rationalizations rather than true causes. The unconscious stores what psychologists call implicit motives, drives and needs that were formed early in life and continue to influence you regardless of your conscious goals. Someone might consciously value independence and freedom, while unconsciously craving connection and approval. This creates an internal conflict that plays out in their choices. They pursue solitary careers while feeling inexplicably lonely, or they seek relationships but sabotage them when intimacy deepens. The unconscious motive is pulling in one direction, the conscious identity pulls in another. These unconscious motives are often rooted in unmet childhood needs. A child who rarely received attention might develop an unconscious drive to be noticed, to stand out, to achieve recognition, even if their conscious adult self claims not to care about such things. The unconscious doesn't simply forget what it needed and didn't receive, it continues seeking it, often in disguised forms, sometimes for an entire lifetime. That person might become a performer, an entrepreneur, a social media influencer, always unconsciously trying to fill a void that was created decades ago. But the unconscious doesn't only seek what was missing. It also avoids what was painful. Your unconscious maintains a sophisticated threat detection system that learned, through your specific life experiences, what to fear and what to avoid. For some people, this means avoiding conflict at all costs because conflict in childhood led to abandonment or rage. For others, it means avoiding success because success in their family led to jealousy or isolation. These patterns operate silently, steering you away from certain paths without ever announcing their presence. This is why people often find themselves stuck in patterns they consciously want to break. The conscious mind says, I want an intimate relationship, but the unconscious whispers, intimacy means vulnerability, and vulnerability led to pain. The conscious mind says, I want to pursue this creative dream, but the unconscious responds, standing out is dangerous, it's safer to stay small. The unconscious isn't being difficult, it's trying to protect you based on lessons learned long ago. What makes this particularly complex is that the unconscious communicates through feeling rather than logic. You don't think, I'm avoiding intimacy because of childhood wounds. You simply feel disinterested in people who show genuine care, or attracted to emotionally unavailable partners who recreate familiar patterns. The unconscious expresses its motives through attractions and aversions, through what feels right and what feels wrong, through the subtle pull towards certain choices and the inexplicable resistance to others. Research has also revealed something fascinating about unconscious goal pursuit. Once your unconscious commits to a goal, it continues working toward it even when your conscious attention is elsewhere. In studies where people were primed with achievement-related words, so subtly they didn't consciously notice, they subsequently performed better on challenging tasks and persisted longer in the face of difficulty. Their unconscious had adopted the goal of achievement and was now pursuing it automatically. This unconscious goal pursuit can work for you or against you. If your unconscious has internalized a goal, perhaps through repeated early experiences, of being perfect and never making mistakes, it will drive you toward perfectionism even when you consciously try to be more relaxed. The unconscious goal operates like a background program, constantly running, constantly influencing behavior, largely invisible to conscious inspection. But here's something hopeful: the unconscious can learn new goals and motivations through experience, just as it learned the old ones. When you repeatedly experience safety in situations that used to feel dangerous, your unconscious gradually updates its threat assessment. When you consistently meet your own needs instead of abandoning them, your unconscious slowly learns that you're trustworthy, that self-care is possible. The change happens slowly, beneath conscious awareness, but it happens. The unconscious also operates through what psychologists call approach and avoidance systems. The approach system drives you toward rewards, opportunities, and positive experiences, while the avoidance system steers you away from threats, losses, and pain. Everyone has both systems, but they're calibrated differently based on your life experiences. Some people have a highly sensitive approach system; they're naturally drawn to novelty, excitement, and reward. Others have a highly sensitive avoidance system; they're more attuned to potential dangers and more motivated to prevent loss than to pursue gain. Neither system is better or worse, but they create different life experiences. A person with a strong approach system might take more risks, pursue more opportunities, and experience more excitement, but also more disappointment when things don't work out. A person with a strong avoidance system might live more cautiously, experience less dramatic failure, but also potentially less adventure and growth. Your unconscious calibration of these systems, formed early and reinforced by experience, quietly determines what kind of life you tend to create. Understanding your unconscious motivations doesn't require years of therapy or deep psychological excavation. Sometimes it simply requires paying attention to patterns, noticing what you repeatedly move toward and what you consistently avoid, observing the gap between what you say you want and what you actually pursue, listening to the feelings that arise when you contemplate different choices. Your unconscious is always speaking; the question is whether you're listening. As we move deeper still into the unconscious realm, we encounter one of its most profound mysteries: the way it holds and processes trauma, pain, and the experiences too overwhelming for conscious awareness to bear. Your unconscious is not only a repository of skills and habits and motivations, it's also a protective vault, a place where experiences too painful or confusing to consciously process are stored, sometimes for decades, sometimes for a lifetime. When something happens that exceeds your capacity to cope, especially in childhood when your capacity is naturally limited, your unconscious can essentially split off that experience, sequestering it away from conscious awareness while still carrying its emotional weight. This isn't a conscious decision. You don't choose to forget or suppress. Rather, your unconscious acts as an automatic circuit breaker, protecting your conscious mind from being overwhelmed by shutting down awareness of experiences that would otherwise be intolerable. A child who experiences neglect or abuse might have no conscious memory of specific incidents, yet their unconscious holds those experiences in the form of bodily sensations, emotional reactions, and behavioral patterns that emerge in their adult relationships. Psychologists call this dissociation, a disconnection between conscious awareness and experience. In its extreme forms, it can create gaps in memory or even separate identities. But in milder forms, it's something most people experience regularly. Have you ever driven somewhere and arrived with no memory of the journey? That's a form of dissociation, your conscious awareness separated from the experience while your unconscious handled the driving. In the case of trauma, this same mechanism can separate awareness from painful experiences, allowing you to function while the unconscious holds the weight of what happened. But here's what makes this so complex: even when consciously forgotten, these experiences continue to influence you. Your unconscious remembers everything your conscious mind has forgotten, and it expresses these memories not through narrative recall but through emotional flashbacks, through bodily sensations that arise without apparent cause, through reactions that seem disproportionate to present circumstances. You might feel suddenly panicked in a situation that resembles, in some unconscious way, an early traumatic experience, even though you have no conscious memory of that original event. This is because the unconscious doesn't store traumatic memories the way it stores ordinary memories. Trauma gets encoded differently, bypassing the normal narrative-making structures of memory and lodging instead in more primitive, emotion-based brain regions. It becomes what researchers call implicit memory, memory without a sense of remembering, experience without a storyline. You don't recall the trauma, you re-experience fragments of it in the present moment, your unconscious believing, on some level, that the danger is happening now. The unconscious does this not to torment you but to protect you. By keeping traumatic experiences out of conscious awareness, it allows you to continue functioning, to maintain relationships, to build a life. The problem is that this protective mechanism has costs. Those sequestered experiences continue to send signals, to trigger reactions, to shape your behavior, but now you're responding to ghosts, to dangers that no longer exist, to patterns your conscious mind can't see or understand. This is why people often repeat painful patterns without knowing why. A woman finds herself repeatedly attracted to emotionally unavailable partners, unconsciously recreating the dynamics she had with a distant father. A man responds to minor criticism with overwhelming shame, his unconscious treating it as the devastating rejection he experienced in childhood. These aren't conscious choices, they're the unconscious's attempt to master old experiences, to finally get them right, to somehow resolve what was never resolved. Psychologists call this repetition compulsion, the unconscious tendency to recreate painful situations in an unconscious attempt to heal them. It's as if the unconscious believes, this time it will be different. This time I'll be chosen, I'll be good enough, I'll be safe. But because the pattern is unconscious, the person keeps selecting similar situations and similar people, wondering why the same pain keeps finding them, never realizing they're unconsciously drawn to what feels familiar, even when familiar means painful. Yet the unconscious also has a profound drive toward healing. Given the right conditions, safety, trust, patience, it will gradually reveal what it has been holding, bringing painful memories and feelings into conscious awareness at a pace the person can handle. This is the basis of much therapeutic work, creating a safe enough container that the unconscious can begin to release what it has been protecting, allowing old experiences to be processed, integrated, and finally laid to rest. The body plays a crucial role in this process, because the unconscious stores trauma not just in the brain but throughout the entire nervous system. That knot in your stomach, that tension in your shoulders, that tightness in your chest, these aren't random physical sensations. They're often the unconscious expressing what it remembers, what it hasn't yet been able to put into words. The body keeps the score, as one researcher famously put it, holding what the mind has forgotten. This is why purely cognitive approaches to healing are sometimes insufficient. You can consciously understand that you're safe now, that the past is over, that your fears are irrational, and still your unconscious triggers the same protective responses. True healing often requires reaching the unconscious through the body, through repeated experiences of safety that allow the nervous system itself to update its threat assessments. This might happen through therapy, through safe relationships, through practices like yoga or meditation that help regulate the nervous system. The unconscious also protects you through what psychologists call defense mechanisms, automatic strategies for managing painful emotions and maintaining psychological stability. Denial, projection, rationalization, intellectualization, these aren't character flaws but sophisticated unconscious strategies for keeping overwhelming material out of awareness while you develop the capacity to face it. A person might rationalize a parent's abuse as necessary discipline, not because they're foolish but because their unconscious knows they're not yet strong enough to face the full truth. These defense mechanisms can persist long after they've served their protective purpose. An adult with tremendous inner resources might still deploy childhood defenses, their unconscious not realizing that the danger has passed, that they now have capacities they didn't have as a child. This is part of the poignant quality of the unconscious, it's trying so hard to help, using the best tools it developed long ago, not knowing that better tools might now be available. But here's something beautiful, the unconscious isn't only about survival and protection. It also holds your deepest wisdom, your resilience, your capacity for healing and growth. Even in the midst of trauma, the unconscious records moments of kindness, experiences of beauty, evidence of your own strength. These resources remain available, waiting to be accessed, often emerging spontaneously when you need them most. And the unconscious has a profound capacity for integration, for taking fragmented experiences and weaving them into a coherent whole. Given time, safety, and the right conditions, what was once too overwhelming to face can gradually be integrated into your conscious life story, transformed from raw trauma into survivable memory. The pain doesn't disappear, but it changes quality. It becomes something you experienced rather than something you're still experiencing, something that happened then rather than something still happening now. As we near the end of our journey through the unconscious landscape, we arrive at perhaps its most beautiful territory, the realm of creativity, imagination, and the mysterious ways new ideas emerge from hidden depths. You've probably had the experience of struggling with a creative problem, searching for the right word, the solution to a puzzle, the melody that completes a song, and finding nothing. Then, hours or days later, the answer simply appears, fully formed, as if someone whispered it to you. This isn't magic. It's your unconscious doing what it does magnificently, making connections that your conscious, linear mind could never deliberately construct. The creative process reveals the unconscious at its most playful and profound. While your conscious mind works through problems step by step, following logical rules and established pathways, your unconscious operates through what psychologists call associative thinking, connecting ideas not by logic but by feeling, similarity, metaphor, and patterns that operate below the threshold of reason. It's why a walk in the forest might suddenly solve a work problem, or why a dream might contain the insight you've been seeking. Throughout history, countless creative breakthroughs have emerged from the unconscious realm. The chemist Kekulé discovered the structure of benzene through a dream of a snake eating its tail. Paul McCartney woke with the melody For Yesterday fully formed in his mind. The mathematician Srinivasa Ramanujan attributed his remarkable formulas to visions that came to him from a Hindu goddess, what we might understand as his unconscious presenting solutions in symbolic form. These weren't isolated incidents but glimpses into how the unconscious naturally works when given challenging material to process. What makes the unconscious such a powerful creative force is its ability to hold contradictions simultaneously, to entertain possibilities that seem illogical, to combine elements that don't rationally belong together. While your conscious mind categorizes and separates, this is work, that is play, this is serious, that is frivolous, your unconscious freely mixes categories, allowing unexpected combinations to emerge. Some of humanity's greatest innovations came from unconscious connections between seemingly unrelated domains. The unconscious also operates without the constraints of self-criticism and judgment that often limit conscious creativity. When you sit down to deliberately write or paint or compose, a critical voice often emerges, "That's not good enough, this doesn't make sense, who do you think you are?" But when the unconscious generates ideas spontaneously, they arrive before the critic can interfere. This is why artists and writers often speak of getting out of their own way, of learning to access a state where the work flows through them rather than from them. Research has shown that creative insights are more likely to occur in certain mental states, particularly when you're relaxed, slightly drowsy, or engaged in repetitive, undemanding activities. This is because these states reduce activity in the prefrontal cortex, the conscious control center of your brain, allowing the unconscious to make connections more freely. The shower, the long drive, the hypnagogic state between waking and sleeping, these are portals through which unconscious creativity can emerge. But the unconscious isn't only the source of creative inspiration, it's also where skills become artistry. When a musician plays a complex piece, they're not consciously thinking about each note, their unconscious has internalized years of practice into fluid, expressive performance. The conscious mind sets the intention, but the unconscious executes with a grace that conscious control could never achieve. This is what we call being in the zone or experiencing flow, those moments when your unconscious takes over and you perform beyond what you believed yourself capable of. Athletes describe this experience vividly. The game slows down, decisions happen without thought, the body knows what to do before the mind can analyze. This isn't the absence of skill but the presence of unconscious mastery so complete that conscious interference would only diminish it. The basketball player who starts thinking consciously about their shooting form is more likely to miss. The best performance emerges when years of practice have been encoded into unconscious competence. The unconscious also operates as a vast library of material for creative work. Every book you've read, every conversation you've had, every image you've seen, even those you've long forgotten, remains accessible to your unconscious. When you're writing and the perfect metaphor suddenly appears, when you're speaking and an apt quote emerges from memory, that's your unconscious searching its vast archive and presenting exactly what's needed. You didn't consciously remember that you knew it, your unconscious simply delivered it. This is why diverse experiences enrich creativity. The more material your unconscious has to work with, different cultures, varied perspectives, unusual experiences, the more connections it can potentially make. Creative people aren't necessarily more intelligent than others, they've often simply given their unconscious a richer database of raw material to recombine in novel ways. The unconscious also processes metaphor and symbolism in ways the conscious mind struggles with. Dreams, for instance, speak in the native language of the unconscious, images, feelings, bizarre juxtapositions that carry emotional truth even when they defy logical sense. A dream of being lost in an endless building might express your unconscious feelings about a confusing life situation more powerfully than any conscious analysis could. The unconscious thinks in poetry while the conscious mind thinks in prose. This symbolic thinking extends beyond dreams. When you feel inexplicably moved by a piece of music, when a painting resonates with something you can't quite name, when a story touches you in ways you don't fully understand, that's your unconscious recognizing patterns, truths, and emotions that resonate with your own experience. Art speaks unconscious to unconscious, bypassing conscious interpretation to touch something deeper. The creative unconscious also has a healing quality. When you express difficult experiences through art, writing, or music, you're giving your unconscious a way to process and integrate what might be too painful for direct conscious examination. The act of creation itself can be therapeutic, allowing unconscious material to find form and voice, transforming raw emotion into something that can be witnessed, understood, and released. And here's something profound: the unconscious doesn't just create in isolation, it's constantly absorbing the creative expressions of others, learning from them, being shaped by them. When you read a beautiful sentence, your unconscious notes its rhythm and structure. When you see an elegant solution to a problem, your unconscious encodes the pattern. Every piece of creativity you encounter becomes part of the vast network from which your own creativity eventually emerges. This is why exposure to great art, literature, music, and ideas is so valuable, not because you'll consciously remember and apply them, but because your unconscious will absorb their patterns, their techniques, their ways of seeing, and they'll eventually influence your own creative expression in ways you'll never be able to trace directly. You're not copying, you're allowing your unconscious to be fertilized by the creative work of others, creating conditions for new growth. The creative unconscious reminds us that we're not entirely separate, isolated beings but participants in a vast, shared creative process, learning from those who came before, contributing our own expressions, influencing those who come after. Your unconscious creativity is both uniquely yours and part of something larger, a river of human imagination flowing through you. As we journey toward the completion of our exploration, we turn now to one of the unconscious mind's most essential and often overlooked roles: the way it governs your relationships, reading others and shaping connections in ways that happen far too quickly for conscious thought. Every time you meet someone new, your unconscious makes thousands of calculations in the first few seconds, assessing safety, detecting emotional states, predicting behavior, all before you've consciously formed a single thought about the person standing before you. Within the first 100 milliseconds of seeing a face, your unconscious has already made judgments about trustworthiness, competence, and likability. A tenth of a second. Faster than you can blink. These snap judgments aren't arbitrary, they're based on patterns your unconscious has extracted from every social interaction you've ever had. A slight tension around someone's eyes reminds your unconscious of a person who once betrayed your trust. A warmth in someone's smile resonates with early experiences of safety and acceptance. You feel instantly comfortable with some people and uneasy around others, and you usually attribute these feelings to intuition or chemistry, never realizing it's your unconscious detecting subtle patterns and responding accordingly. But the unconscious doesn't just read others, it also manages your own social behavior with remarkable sophistication. When you're in conversation, your conscious mind might be focused on the content of what's being said, but your unconscious is simultaneously managing eye contact, facial expressions, body orientation, tone of voice, and timing, all the nonverbal elements that actually carry most of the meaning in human communication. Studies suggest that up to 93% of emotional communication happens through these unconscious channels rather than through words themselves. This is why you can sometimes sense that someone is upset even when they insist they're fine. Their words say one thing, but their unconscious nonverbal signals, a subtle tightening of the jaw, a slight withdrawal, a flatness in vocal tone, tell your unconscious something different. You can't consciously articulate what tipped you off, you just know something is wrong. Your unconscious has detected the mismatch between verbal and nonverbal communication, and it trusts the nonverbal truth. The unconscious also orchestrates something called interactional synchrony, the way people unconsciously coordinate their movements, rhythms, and even their breathing when they're connecting well. When you're in rapport with someone, you begin to mirror each other's postures, match each other's speaking pace, and fall into complementary rhythms without any conscious awareness. This synchrony creates a felt sense of connection, of being understood, of being on the same wavelength. When it's absent, conversations feel awkward and disconnected, even if you can't pinpoint exactly why. This mirroring begins in infancy and continues throughout life. Babies as young as a few days old will unconsciously mimic facial expressions they see. If you stick out your tongue at a newborn, they'll often stick their tongue out in return. This isn't a conscious imitation but an automatic unconscious response, the beginning of a lifetime of unconscious social coordination. Through these countless micro-interactions, you learn to be human among other humans. Your unconscious also maintains what psychologists call theory of mind, the ability to unconsciously infer what others are thinking and feeling. When you're talking to someone, your unconscious is constantly generating hypotheses about their mental state. What do they want? What are they feeling? What might they say next? How will they respond if I say this? Most of this modeling happens completely outside awareness, yet it allows you to navigate social interactions with remarkable fluidity. But here's where it gets fascinating. Your unconscious theory of mind is deeply shaped by your own experiences and can sometimes be wildly inaccurate. If you grew up in an environment where emotions were dangerous or unpredictable, your unconscious might have learned to constantly scan for threat, interpreting neutral expressions as hostile or reading rejection into ordinary moments of disconnection. You're not being paranoid, your unconscious is simply using the only model it learned. The unconscious also plays a crucial role in attachment, the way you bond with others throughout life. Your earliest relationships, particularly with primary caregivers, create unconscious templates for how relationships work, what to expect from others, and what you deserve. These templates, formed before explicit memory develops, continue to operate throughout your life, drawing you towards certain types of people and certain types of relationships. Someone with a secure unconscious attachment template approaches relationships expecting responsiveness and care. When conflicts arise, their unconscious expects repair and resolution. But someone with an anxious attachment template, formed through inconsistent early care, unconsciously expects abandonment, so they might cling too tightly, seek constant reassurance, or interpret normal distance as rejection. These aren't conscious strategies but unconscious predictions about how relationships unfold. Similarly, someone with an avoidant attachment template, often formed when emotional needs were consistently unmet or punished, learns unconsciously to expect that depending on others leads to disappointment or pain. As adults, they might unconsciously maintain emotional distance, struggle with intimacy, or feel suffocated by others' needs, all protective strategies their unconscious developed long ago. The profound thing is that these unconscious attachment patterns don't just influence how you experience relationships, they actually shape how others respond to you, creating self-fulfilling prophecies. If your unconscious expects rejection, you might unconsciously behave in ways that keep people at a distance, which leads to the very rejection your unconscious was trying to avoid. The pattern perpetuates itself, all outside conscious awareness. Yet attachment patterns aren't fixed. Through new experiences, particularly relationships where you're consistently met with care and attunement, your unconscious can gradually update its templates. This is the power of what psychologists call corrective emotional experiences. When your unconscious expects abandonment but instead receives consistent presence, when it expects judgment but encounters acceptance, these experiences slowly revise the old patterns. The unconscious also governs something called emotional contagion in relationships, the way feelings spread between people without conscious awareness. When you spend time with someone anxious, you often become anxious yourself, not because they've told you anything worrying, but because your unconscious has picked up on their stress and synchronized with it. This happens through countless subtle cues, breathing patterns, muscle tension, vocal qualities, that your unconscious detects and mirrors. This is both a gift and a challenge. The gift is that it creates empathy and connection. Your ability to feel what others feel allows you to understand them, to respond appropriately, to create genuine intimacy. The challenge is that you can absorb others' emotional states without realizing it, carrying feelings that aren't originally yours, becoming depressed around depressed people or agitated around agitated ones. Understanding this unconscious emotional contagion is crucial for maintaining healthy boundaries. It's not that you need to shut yourself off from others' emotions, but rather to develop awareness of what feelings are yours and what you've unconsciously absorbed from your environment. This awareness itself is a bridge between unconscious and conscious, bringing into the light what was operating in shadow. The unconscious also holds your deepest capacities for love, for empathy, for genuine connection. When you feel moved by someone else's pain, when you spontaneously reach out to comfort, when you sacrifice your own comfort for another's well-being, these aren't always conscious choices but unconscious impulses arising from your deep social nature. The unconscious knows, in ways the conscious mind sometimes forgets, that you're fundamentally interconnected with others, that your well-being is woven together with theirs. As we approach the end of our journey through the vast territories of the unconscious mind, we arrive at perhaps the most important question. Now that you understand the hidden architecture that shapes your life, what does this knowledge offer you? The answer begins with a paradox. The more you understand about your unconscious mind, the more you realize how little direct control you actually have, and yet, simultaneously, the more freedom you discover. This seems contradictory, but it points to a profound truth. Freedom doesn't come from controlling your unconscious but from understanding it, working with it, creating conditions that allow it to serve your deepest well-being. Think of your relationship with your unconscious as a partnership rather than a hierarchy. For too long, Western culture has imagined the conscious mind as a rider controlling a horse, the rational self directing the irrational animal beneath. But the unconscious isn't a beast to be tamed, it's more like an ancient, wise companion who speaks a different language, operates by different rules, and knows things your conscious mind has forgotten or never learned. This companion has been with you since before you could speak, absorbing every experience, learning patterns from millions of moments, developing strategies to keep you safe and help you thrive. Sometimes these strategies are outdated, based on a world that no longer exists or threats that have passed. But the unconscious developed them with profound care, doing the best it could with the information available at the time. Understanding this allows you to approach your unconscious patterns with compassion rather than judgment. When you find yourself repeating behaviors you consciously want to change, when emotions arise that seem disproportionate to the situation, when you're drawn to people or circumstances that don't serve you, these aren't failures or flaws but messages from your unconscious, opportunities to understand what it's trying to protect you from or what unmet need it's still seeking to fill. The question isn't how do I stop this, but rather what is my unconscious trying to tell me? What does it need? This shift in perspective, from fighting against your unconscious to listening to it, can transform your entire relationship with yourself. Your anxiety isn't an enemy to be defeated but a messenger alerting you to something that needs attention. Your resistance to change isn't weakness but your unconscious's reasonable caution about the unknown. Your seemingly irrational attractions and aversions are your unconscious's attempt to guide you toward what it believes will bring safety or fulfillment. Learning to listen to your unconscious requires developing what might be called internal bilingualism, the ability to translate between the language of conscious thought and the language of unconscious feeling, symbol, and sensation. The unconscious speaks through your body, through dreams, through the stories you're drawn to, through the metaphors that naturally arise in your speech, through the feelings that well up without apparent reason. When you learn to attend to these communications, you gain access to a profound source of wisdom. But listening isn't passive acceptance. Sometimes what your unconscious learned in the past isn't what serves you now. The work then becomes gently teaching your unconscious new patterns through repeated experience, showing it, through action rather than argument, that the old fears no longer apply, that new ways of being are possible, that what once was dangerous might now be safe. This is slow work, requiring patience and consistency, but it's the only way to create lasting change. The unconscious also responds to ritual, to repetition, to practices that speak its symbolic language. This is why meditation, journaling, creative expression, time in nature, and meaningful rituals can be so transformative. They create bridges between conscious intention and unconscious process. You're not just thinking about change, you're creating experiences that allow your unconscious to learn and evolve. Understanding the unconscious also invites humility. When you realize that much of your behavior is driven by forces outside your awareness, that your perceptions are constructions rather than direct reality, that your memories are creative reconstructions, that your choices are influenced by factors you'll never fully know, this can be liberating rather than disturbing. It means you can hold your beliefs and preferences more lightly, remain curious about your own motivations, extend compassion to yourself and others for the unconscious patterns you're all navigating. This humility extends to your relationships. When you understand that everyone is operating from unconscious patterns formed by their unique history, you can see difficult behaviors not as malicious choices but as unconscious strategies, often desperate attempts to meet needs or avoid pain. This doesn't excuse harmful behavior, but it adds a dimension of understanding that can soften judgment and open possibilities for genuine change. The unconscious also reminds you of your profound interconnectedness. Every person you've ever known has left traces in your unconscious, shaping how you think, feel, and behave. You carry your parents and teachers, your friends and enemies, the authors you've read and the strangers you've briefly encountered. You're not an isolated self but a meeting place of countless influences, a node in a vast web of human connection. And just as others have shaped your unconscious, you're constantly shaping the unconscious minds of those around you, through your presence, your words, your emotional state, your way of being in the world. This is both a responsibility and an opportunity. The kindness you unconsciously radiate can shift someone's entire day. The anxiety you carry can spread to those near you. You're always teaching others' unconscious minds something about what to expect from the world. Perhaps most beautifully, understanding the unconscious reveals that you're always in process, always becoming. Your unconscious continues to learn and adapt throughout your entire life. The patterns formed in childhood aren't final verdicts but starting points that can evolve through new experience. You can, at any age, teach your unconscious new ways of being, new responses to old triggers, new possibilities where you once saw only limitations. This is the gift of awareness, not control over the unconscious but collaboration with it. When you stop fighting against your own depths and instead turn toward them with curiosity and compassion, you access resources you didn't know you had, creativity you thought was lost, resilience you didn't believe you possessed, wisdom that was there all along, waiting to be recognized. As you drift towards sleep now, or toward whatever comes next in your day, consider this: beneath your conscious awareness, your unconscious continues its tireless work, processing the day's experiences, consolidating learning, making connections, solving problems, preparing you for tomorrow. It never stops, this vast intelligence that operates in shadow. And now, Having glimpsed its territories, you might move through life with a little more wonder, a little more patience with yourself, a little more trust in the profound wisdom that guides you from beneath the surface of awareness. The unconscious mind, your ancient companion, your creative wellspring, your protective guardian, your link to all of human history and everyone you've ever known. It's been with you from your first breath and will remain until your last, quietly shaping your journey, holding your story, carrying you forward into the infinite mystery of being alive.